So, Daredevil is one of, if not my favorite TV show of all time. It set the bar ridiculously high and is one of the reasons why I got into film so much in the first place. It's a prestige crime drama that focuses on the humanity of our characters intimately, coupled with rich cinematography, complex themes, deep symbolism, and so much more. In 2018 it got cancelled, but it's 2025 and we're back with Daredevil Born Again. So what did I think of it? Well, it's not that great so far. I don't hate it, but the 2 episodes had a lot of problems for me. After 7 years of waiting for this show and the constant critical praise for it, I actually allowed myself to get excited, and maybe my expectations were slightly too high, but I don't know. This didn't entirely work for me. But why? Well, let's get into it. And real quick, if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe. So let's start with episode 1, and of course there's going to be spoilers throughout this entire video. I actually think this is a pretty bad episode in terms of an episode 1, and even worse when you consider that this is trying to cater to new audiences who have never seen Daredevil. I'm curious to see people's reactions to this first episode from people who've never seen the Netflix one, because when I was trying to view it from that lens, the episode seemed worse. You're not given any reason to care about any of these characters, even Matt. Everything is just thrown at you all at once. You're put into an extremely established world with so many chaotic things happening and a lot of layered baggage and backstory. Like, why is this random assassin guy saying hello to Karen? Who even really is Karen? Why do we care? Why is Fisk talking about getting shot in the face, and how does Fisk know Matt is a vigilante? Like, there's so much packed in here that I think it'd be really intimidating to start watching the show at this point. I even think that season 2 episode 1 and season 3 episode 1 of Netflix is a better introduction to the show than this, which is ironic because the whole reason we're in this mess is because the creatives were worried about alienating a new audience, which is why this is a season 1 and not a season 4. Watching season 2 episode 1 after Born Again was honestly really jarring for many reasons, but the first 3 scenes of the show do such a great job of setting the stage for the season. First, we get Matt going after these robbers and establish our protagonist's everyday world, which is really just basic storytelling. And then we cut to Matt's best friend Foggy, which is an established relationship like Matt has with Kirsten, but it works better in season 2 simply because of the pacing of it and the type of dialogue. You get to learn how they banter with each other, how Matt's life as Daredevil is affecting their relationship and their law practice, and these bits of dialogue also set up future conflicts in the season. Then we get the trio together working in their everyday environments helping their clients, and then a scene setting up the Punisher. It's very fluid in its setup, and yet even the first episode of season 3 does a better job of introducing us to the character. You get a feel for where Matt is in his shattered life. You even get a scene where he explains his powers to Karen so the viewers know Matt's powers. And it establishes the character arcs for Matt, Fisk, Karen, and Foggy for the rest of the season. I feel like we don't get a good vibe of Matt within those first few scenes of the show. It's like I don't really know who he is, and when he suits up as Daredevil for the first time, it should have been him doing some ordinary crime stopping, like Matt stopping the robbers in season 2 episode 1, so the viewers get a sense of what their lives are like on an everyday basis, instead of immediately rushing into this bullseye stuff. By the time Matt stops being Daredevil, it's hard to feel the impact of that within this episode because they barely establish him. You don't really feel the loss because you barely know what these characters had unless you had already watched the original series. So it's entirely relying on you caring about these people already. If anything, Foggy should have died at the end of the first episode, and we spend the entirety of the first episode setting up Fisk's campaign and establishing Matt's dynamic with Karen, Foggy, and the new characters. That death simply needed a lot more build-up and momentum to get to that point, because when that happens, it feels really jarring and weightless. Next thing I want to talk about is the pacing, which is kind of horrendous in episode 1. I felt very far away immediately, and I didn't understand this from a creative point of view. Our first scene is supposed to reintroduce us to a familiar world. As the directors put it, it's supposed to feel like a warm hug.
Becky's Diner, eh? Love that place. Closed. Turning it into a soul cycle. You're evil for even telling me that.
I get the intent, but the way it's edited utterly destroys these scenes. I can barely hear what Matt, Foggy, and Karen are even talking about because the music is overpowering the dialogue, and the scenes are intercut with random B-rolls of New York, which again destroys the intimacy needed for this scene. The same thing happens in Josie's, except it's a little worse because we're introduced to a couple of new characters that are already established, like Cherry and Kirsten McDuffie. We constantly cut back and forth between all of them, and they're all talking as if we already know the context of their conversations. Like, this would be fine a little later, trailer, but as a first scene and an introduction to the series, saying it's jarring would be putting it mildly. The scene plays out so chaotically when it's supposed to introduce the audience to the normalcy of these characters' lives and make it feel intimate and like a warm hug. It's just too much to register with all the new things happening and the jumping around between character to character. This is a persistent issue throughout the first episode. It feels like we're just checking boxes on scenes being filmed and they're simply being stitched together. The Mayor Fisk stuff felt incredibly rushed too. I feel like it would have been better to lightly introduce the plotline of Fisk running for mayor before the 1-year time skip and then just skip to him being mayor instead of the development of his election being crammed into one episode. The progression of his election felt completely unnatural and so bizarrely paced that the impact was completely gone by the time he actually got elected. It felt like it was in a huge hurry to just get him elected so we could get that set up for the season. The other thing is Heather and Matt. This relationship feels the most rushed and underdeveloped in my opinion. It probably doesn't help either that I feel zero chemistry between the two of them as well. Even She-Hulk and Matt were completely electric right away, but I just don't feel anything between these two. They go on a date and then shortly after they're just a regular established couple. There's practically no build up to them being intimate partners or why they even like each other. But let's go back a bit and talk about, well, Foggy's death. First off, I don't believe for a second that he's actually dead. The first thing is that Marvel must know how important this character is and how much meaning he has to fans just to kill him off in 10 minutes and have no build up for it, no funeral, and practically no lasting impact in the first 2 episodes besides a few mentions of it. So in the original Born Again show, Foggy was killed, but it was off screen, which is just absolutely insane to me by the way. How did that even get written? But they rewrote and reshot the first episode, but kept episodes 2 through 7 of the old show, so in order to make that plot fit in, he still needed to die. Luckily, Karen wasn't even mentioned at all in the original Born Again show, so she's not dead, and I think it's confirmed she's coming back in episodes 8 and 9. But Foggy's death feels way too abrupt for it to be real for me. I might just be on some hardcore copium right now, but there's definitely more to this. First, we need to learn more about why Dex even wanted to kill Foggy, which will definitely be explored more. My guess is that Benny was caught up in something too deep that related to Vanessa's underworld crime stuff, and he was getting too close, so Vanessa ordered a hit on Foggy. Then the FBI probably put Foggy in protective custody or something like that to build a case against Vanessa and take her down. I also think killing Foggy off like this has no real benefit for anyone. It just pisses off the OG fans, and for new viewers, this death is meaningless to them anyway because they have no reason to care about Foggy after only seeing him for really less than 10 minutes. It feels jarring too because Charlie Cox and Deborah Ann Wall's acting is so good and dramatic when Foggy dies, but it's still not enough to make me feel emotional about Foggy dying because there's no build up to it, and it just feels fake. The first 15 minutes of the show happened so fast that it honestly felt like Matt was having a nightmare and was going to wake up soon. It is actually confirmed that Foggy will appear in season 2 of Born Again, but we don't know if he's just gonna have a cameo, be in flashbacks, a hallucination, or if he's going to be fully back yet. So we'll see. If they did legitimately kill him off there, it's honestly going to go into the top 5 most disrespectful deaths on TV. I do like the scene with Matt and Karen talking about Foggy's death and how it affected them. Saying he refuses to believe a tragedy had to break them apart, something like that, was a particularly good line, and I want more of that. There are elements of the show that are sticking out and are really good, but it just needs to claw its way out more in the future if I'm going to put it in the same caliber as the Netflix show. The acting between the two is great, but it is short unfortunately. And I think they write Karen out of the show as well as they can given the broader context of them not being in the original pitch of the show, so I forgive it for feeling too abrupt in that area. And a small nitpick, I don't like the new tint on Matt's glasses. It doesn't cover his eyes enough and it makes it feel like he's not really blind and is making too much eye contact with people. I don't know if that's just me though. Next, I want to talk about the music. First off with the music is that I really dig the Newton Brothers' new score for the show. I do miss John Paisano, but I do think when you're making a revamped version of the show that we need to do something different, and I think the Newton Brothers do a really good job. However, the editing really misuses music and score from these first 2 episodes. So many of the scenes have background music and score, we just need to let the ambiance and natural sounds take over sometimes. It's kind of distracting and a little annoying at times when there's just score and music constantly playing. I don't understand why it's so intense. All Matt's doing is just following this guy. I also don't like the rock song Needle Drops at the end of the episodes. It feels so out of place. I'm getting more 2003 Ben Affleck Daredevil vibes from the show sometimes. Like tonally it just feels so off cutting to credits with these rock songs. It feels so unnatural and off-putting. I just don't like that. And it just often misuses score and feels so random at points.
Well, I'd be delighted.
Thank you.
Like it's relying way too much on the score to make it feel much more intense than it is, and it's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for it. Another thing that is reminding me of the Ben Affleck Daredevil is, well, the CGI. It's kinda terrible. I heard that it was a little iffy from early critic reactions, but I was still not expecting it to be as jarring as it was. And it feels so unnecessary too. It's simple shots of Matt in his Daredevil costume simply running on rooftops. Like, can we not get a stunt double to do that? It happened plenty of times in the lower budget Netflix version. The Bullseye and Matt fight gets worse and worse for me, honestly. It's easily the weakest one-take fight in the series. Again, they mask a lot of their fights in CGI for some reason, and it feels video gamey and fake. I have no idea why they did this either. The leaked behind-the-scenes footage showed them actually fighting each other with good choreography, so I have no idea why they'd CGI over the actual actors fighting each other, and then had to mask it with a lot of fog to hide how bad it is. Is it not easier to just film the actors fighting and call it a day? Marvel does this all the time, and I hate that it's reached Daredevil, especially after seeing all these practical stunts. We even saw Daredevil swinging from a building to tackle Dex and how that was practical, and in the show, it's there for like half a second and is also masked in CGI it seems. Some of the punches feel way too fake too. I know that was already a bit of a problem in the Netflix version, but at least there the stakes are built up and I'm so immersed in the scene that I don't care. It's really noticeable seeing Matt beat up Dex here, how weightless the punches feel and how fake the background is. It kind of feels like I'm watching a commercial at points. I do like some of the fights though where Dex just randomly stops fighting Matt to kill civilians. I thought that was pretty cold and in character for him, and I think they handled the violence in the show very well. And for what it's worth, I do really like Wilson Bethel's acting here as Dex. There are some subtle moments where we get to do like a close-up of his face and we get to see his eye popping out, and he does get to do some acting work there. Also this part where he just starts psychotically laughing at Matt after he just killed Foggy. And I love this small part where he just lightly taps Matt's shoulder like, hey, come on, it was funny. Like after he just killed his best friend. It's so psychotic, I love it. The fight with Matt and the NYPD officers was also kinda meh to me. In some ways it reminded me of the Netflix show and was good, but again, it's the editing ruining it for me. There are way too many cuts in the fights and it feels somewhat lazily put together. I like the brutality of the fight, but it's pretty short and the way it's cut together makes it a little unsatisfying to watch. Especially when Matt unleashes this scream at the end. I think it was supposed to feel a bit more freeing and angry that he's basically unleashing this Daredevil part of himself again after repressing it for so long, but I just don't feel the impact. At the very least, I like that it was all practical and grounded, and I hope they keep that up. I'm not hugely against Matt swinging around and being acrobatic like he is in the comics, but if you're going to do it, the CGI needs more polishing. It's just weird because the action was something I was not expecting to complain about because they got Philip Silvera, who was the fight and stunt coordinator of season 1 and I think season 2 of Netflix, so I fully know that the show is capable of great fights, but so far I'm not really impressed, and I'm honestly kind of worried about seeing more. Next thing I want to talk about are the side characters. These guys feel really undercooked and I don't care about any of them so far. Cherry, Heather, and Kirsten need a lot of work. Kirsten I feel like is supposed to be the new Foggy, where she's Matt's new best friend and law partner, but it's just not working right now. I think part of the relationship just feels too forced, cute, and unnatural. Heather, I already talked about it, but their romance is not sold at all for me. They don't really have much in common or shared intimacy to be a couple, so they need to do a lot there. Cherry feels like he's supposed to be the new Brett Mahoney, or basically like the Commissioner Gordon to Batman basically. I just don't know anything about Cherry and his personality, it's just whatever. Our very first scene with Brett was so simple but so full of personality. Seeing him interact with Foggy, knowing he's got a mom addicted to cigars, and just the mannerisms gave the character so much flavor. There's just no sauce with these new characters, I just can't get myself to care about them. I think my favorite new addition is the BB Urich stuff, where the show is intercut with her interviews. Something they're doing a great job within the new show so far is making New York feel like a real character. Her going around asking people what they think about the politics happening is really cool, and I like the film style of it as well. Kinda reminds me of the Raimi films and Spider-Man 1 where like going around New York asking people what they think of Spider-Man, so I thought that was cool. Next, I want to talk about the cinematography. The cinematography and color grading are really bugging me. The show is feeling pretty cheap, not even in comparison to the Netflix shows, but even just Marvel in general. Looking at something like Miss Marvel, Loki, or even and Moon Knight, the show lacks depth in terms of color and contrast. There's this weird blur in the show too, constant blue tint, washed out colors, and flat lighting for the most part that I cannot get behind. Even with all that being said, the show doesn't look terrible or anything, but we already know it can look so much better, so it's inevitable to compare it to the Netflix one and see how much worse this one just looks in comparison. Sometimes it will look pretty good every now and then, but if we're talking about consistency, it's just kinda all over the place. Being different doesn't mean it's gonna be bad. I mean, season 3 of Netflix is visually quite different from the first 2 seasons in terms of color grading and lighting, and it worked fantastically there because they were going for a more crime thriller element than a noir, which typically has heavier contrast and more dramatic lighting. But the cinematography, framing, and color grading are still so artistic that you can turn on any episode from that season and it looked great. I did that after watching Born Again, and it was the most jarring thing ever. It's weird because I do really respect the directors Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, and I did hear them talking about in interviews how they see the Netflix show as a masterpiece and really value the artistic lighting choices and cinematography of the show. Also, they directed Loki season 2, which visually is amazing in terms of set design, framing, color grading, and lighting. It's all so good and is easily the best MCU live action show. So getting something like this was not what I was expecting. But again, I know the production on this was kind of a mess, and I do hear that the show overall is really great from people who've already seen all 9 episodes, so we'll just have to wait and see, I guess. Overall, I do think I vibe more with episode 2 because the pacing wasn't as insane, and I was actually able to breathe with the scenes. The vibe of episode 2 felt more like an episode of cable TV like Arrow though, and I mean that in a good and a bad way. I can safely say that I did enjoy episode 2 and had a good time with it, especially watching it a second time knowing what I was getting into, but it's definitely a downgrade when looking back at how prestige the Netflix show was. I know I shouldn't be comparing it to Netflix so much, but that's inevitable since they are a part of the same continuity now. I want to enjoy the show for what it is, but I can't help but notice where it keeps faltering. I'm not entirely against the proceduralness either, where Matt is taking on like a case of the week type thing like White Tiger, but it just needs to get developed more. I need more pathos from these people that Matt is helping, but I'm sure that will get fleshed out more. But even then, while I like episode 2, it still felt slightly underwhelming and a bit meandering at points. The Fisk fixing the whole scene too was kinda silly. It felt very on the nose, like his campaign manager is like, you gotta look out for the optics, and then Fisk conveniently gets this situation to fill this hole with all these people watching, and it felt kinda comedic in a sense that I couldn't take it seriously. Might just be me though.
Filling a hole like this, it's not rocket science. Remember I told you that I'd get things done? Well, here I am getting them done.
Like, I just miss good drama. Like, why does he have to say out loud what he's doing? I feel like we're either moving too slowly or too fast, and the writers are struggling to find a balance. I think it feeling a little slow also has to do with the visuals just looking so meh half the time, that I'm not engaged in the conversations. If we're gonna have most of the episode filled with people just talking, which I like, but if that's going to happen, the visuals really need some heavy lifting, but it oftentimes looks bland, washed out, gray or blue, and overall, it's just kinda uninteresting. Particularly with Fisk in his office, I just don't like being in there. Now, one of my favorite scenes from episode 2 is where Matt walks past a church and all he can do is briefly listen before walking away. I interpret this as his Catholic guilt for letting Foggy die and him intentionally trying to kill Dex. It's like he doesn't feel that he deserves God's grace and forgiveness and can't even stomach walking into a church. I do wish that it was slightly more apparent about what's going on because I feel like I'm slightly reaching for that short scene, but that's how I like to look at it. I am missing a lot of the overt religious imagery that the first 3 seasons had though, and I hope we can get deeper into that instead of it just feeling like a side thing in Matt's life. And I do hope that we get Foggy's death rippling out more in the season because right now, it just feels like he just doesn't exist. Matt seems a little too happy and casual in his day-to-day life for his best friend having been murdered. It's really hard to get a read on where Matt is in his life at this moment. But all in all, I do think I like episode 2 a bit more, but just because the pacing of it was solid and I think there was some genuinely good things in there. But it just feels like a good episode of TV, you know? There's nothing that special about it, it's just good. It has no sauce or flavor. Everything just looks a little too flat and samey. The first episode at least gets creative with the lighting sometimes, and you can tell that there's ambition there with the way it's shot, doing wonders for action scenes, the aspect ratio shifts to convey Matt's powers. You know, you can tell there's a voice there from directors Benson and Moorhead. It's just that they're fighting with a version of the show that had no personality to it. Like, it's the type of show where we have to CGI pigeons into shots now for some reason. In conclusion, the show has a very long way to go for me. It's not terrible, even though I did nothing but complain about it, but that's just because I love the show so much and I want it to be as great as it can be. The critics who've seen the entire season already say it's up there with at least Daredevil season 2, so that makes me happy to hear. Maybe it's just having a rocky start and getting better, but honestly, I'm kinda scared going forward for the rest of the season. I'm more excited about Daredevil Born Again season 2 to be honest, because the writers and directors can just start from scratch and not have to worry so much about all those previous baggage or doing a creative overhaul. But those are all my thoughts. What did you guys think about the first 2 episodes? Did you love them? Did you hate it? Whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to know them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe. Peace.